Hello, everybody. This is Professor Steve Martin with the DMAC Criminal Justice Program, and I'm going to use or try to use some new technology today. And the first thing I wanted to do was use a program called Screencast-O-Matic, and basically it's a voiceover function um, for narratives. And what I want to use this technology on today would be a review of your Module 1 PowerPoints. That would be chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I have a limit of 15 minutes on this, and it should be interesting to see how it turns out. Anyway, what I will do is eventually I'll be able to download this to YouTube, and you'll be able to view it and listen to the narrative, and hopefully you'll find it beneficial and informative. Anyway, so we're going to start out with Chapter 1 from the text, The Police and Introduction, and again, this is for CRJ 111, Police and Society. What the chapter is going to cover are going to be things like the external and internal factors that have an influence on policing, how our democratic form of government and the idea of federalism impacts policing, and a little bit about the history of policing, one of my favorite topics, and some of the current trends in policing. As far as the nature of police work, there's a lot of different things that police do in our society, but primarily three of them that textbooks tend to identify are: number one, the function of law enforcement, and basically that's the enforcement of state laws and city ordinances. The provision of services, which it means providing services to the community, such as community relations programs, things such as vacation watch programs for residents' homes, um, the taking of fingerprints for applicants for certain jobs, those sorts of things. The police provide a vast number of services to the community. And the third thing that's generally referred to in describing police work in America is order maintenance. And what that amounts to is basically just keeping the peace. When there's a disturbance of the peace, the police usually get called to take care of that, and just their mere presence is seen as a mechanism for maintaining order in a community, and so that would be the third thing. Now, the textbook talked a little bit about external and internal factors affecting law enforcement, and some of those things externally, outside the agency, that might be very difficult for the police to control would be things like decentralization of policing. Basically, with the advent of community policing, the police now have more flattened chains of command and those sorts of things, getting away from the military model. And that's due to basically budget cuts and things like that, where you're trying to do more with less in today's society. One of the other things that the police are always trying to maintain is their public perception, their persona in the community. It's a very important aspect of effective policing, because the most effective law enforcement agencies are those that actually have a lot of respect from the community. The laws. The police deal with a wide variety of laws. Like I said earlier, city ordinances, if you're a city agency, state laws. If you're a federal law enforcement agency, you're dealing with federal laws, the enforcement of laws, but also the adherence to laws regarding your Bill of Rights issues, like your 4th, 5th, 6th Amendment rights, and even 8th Amendment rights and 14th Amendment due process rights. The police have to be familiar with all these. The police also have to pay attention as to how society changes. Society does change over time, and a lot of times changes are gradual, but all of a sudden something could happen, maybe a natural disaster or an influx of a certain ethnic or racial group into a community, and it causes changes that vastly affect the police. So the police always have to be aware of societal changes, even the subtle ones. Operating a law enforcement agency within a democratic society is another really interesting aspect of policing. The Bill of Rights is set up to protect the public, citizens, from government powers. The Bill of Rights The first 10 amendments to the Constitution and the 14th Amendment are set up to protect citizens from um, government, and part of the government's the police. So, um, there's a presumption of innocence in the United States. We have to have specific reasons as to why we arrest people or even stop people. And so it kind of ties into the legal challenges and aspects of things that the police have to abide by. Government officials, we work for politicians. Politicians aren't always favorable to law enforcement. Sometimes those two entities clash, and so we have to remind ourselves we work for government officials. Obviously, the media and the police deal with each other all the time. It's really important for the police to deal with the media in a positive light. The media doesn't always portray the police in a positive light, so we need to try to cultivate those relationships and understand the role of both. I think the media as well as the police need to understand the role of each in our society. And of course, the use of technology and the evolution of technology in policing. This is something that's happening all the time, not only in policing, but in the area of forensics and even probation, parole, and corrections. There's always new technological advancements that we have to keep up on. Some of the internal factors we talk about, those things that affect policing from the standpoint of stress and just the working environment for the officer. Obviously, the police have a lot of discretion in how they deal with issues. Sometimes discretion is used wisely, sometimes it's not used so wisely, and usually when it's not used very wisely, that's when it makes the news. And the police come under scrutiny. Of course, stress is always a big issue. There's stress caused by the individual themselves because maybe they're in a constant dangerous environment where they're seeing violence all the time. That will cause a certain amount of violence. Obviously, there's administrative stress passed down to the officers because of the stress put on them by administrators. And another internal factor is maybe the ability or the need for the police to have control of situations at all times. That's something else that can cause some stress. As far as policing in a democratic society, like I said, there are certain challenges with that. The idea of federalism, if you haven't taken Intro to CJ, federalism is the splitting of state government and federal government simply to keep the federal government from getting too overpowering. And of course, we have law enforcement on each side. We have law enforcement at the local, the municipal, the county, the state level, and at the federal level. Our court systems are set up the same way. Our corrections systems are also set up on the state and federal side. So these would be good examples of federalism. And what's really key here is how everybody works together to make that possible and to make it work effectively. Just a brief history of policing. Again, I'm kind of short on time here. Basically, our system of law enforcement in America came from England. And the office of sheriff was something that was actually developed by the kings back in the Middle Ages. And eventually what happened is the London Metropolitan Police Force was created by Sir Robert Peel in 1829 to deal with a wide variety of social and crime problems they were having in Great Britain. And when we started having similar problems in some of the East Coast cities, New York, Philadelphia, and other places out there, Boston, we looked to the London Metropolitan Police as our example that we set up our own police forces with here in America. We have three basic historical eras in the United States as far as policing goes. I would argue that we probably have a fourth now called the Homeland Security era since 9/11. But the political era ran from about 1840 to 1930, and basically a lot of officers got their jobs based on who they knew politically, and they actually had to pay politicians to get on the police departments. Pretty ineffective system, but the police really did have pretty good relations with the community from the standpoint it was primarily foot patrol oriented, and the officers on their foot beats knew the people within their districts very well. Beginning in the 1930s then, we saw wide corruption in policing, and the reform era came along to try to professionalize policing and cut down on the amount of corruption, using more of a quasi-military model, and also some more modern technology. They also put officers into vehicles, which cut down on foot patrols and also the intimate relationship that the police had previously shared with the community. And then we finally got into the 50s, 60s, and 70s, saw crime go up. Thought that maybe the reform model was still somewhat ineffective. Thought maybe it would be possible to try to get back to the more intimate relationship between the police and the community, such as we saw in the political era. So we started putting officers back on foot patrols and trying to enlist the help of the community in solving some of our crime problems. And then the community, beyond the community policing era, then, like I said, the Homeland Security era, I think, is probably the one we're in now, where we're not only dealing with issues locally but also globally. Some of the current trends in policing. Again, we have homeland security issues that we're always dealing with, community policing issues. We're constantly battling on the border, trying to control our borders, and again, this has become a big political issue. And also using fusion centers and other intelligence sources to try to target those which might pose terroristic threats to us. That's called intelligence-led policing. But these were things that 20 years ago, we didn't really talk too much about, from homeland security to even border control and things like that, and intelligence-led policing. Community policing's been around since the early 1980s, especially in the bigger cities of America. These other things have just evolved in the last 10 to 15 years. And so that takes care of Chapter 1 for CRJ 111. Again, I'm going to remind you, I'm going to put together a little bit of a quiz for each chapter to just make sure that you kind of went through and listened to this and looked at it. So after you're done with Chapter 4, go back to the course content portion of Module 1, and I'll have a short quiz. It'll probably just be 5 questions waiting there for you to take about what we reviewed today. So anyway, I'll talk to you in Chapter 2.